This morning I would like to talk about the crucifixion. And we've been discussing the 24 hours, the last 24 hours of Jesus' life. We've had a series over the last couple of weeks of his last day on earth, what's been going on, including the Last Supper, his visit to the garden, the trials, and we are now at the point of the crucifixion. Next week, of course, we will have Mike continuing the series talking about the resurrection. So throughout our studies of this series, we've seen several themes that have persisted. And what we've seen is Jesus' life, which of course may be familiar to you. You know, he died on the cross at Calvary and all of that. But maybe now you've had some other awakenings here. Maybe you finally come to realize that there are some other reasons behind all this that you weren't aware of. I don't know about you, but I have learned a lot. This morning we're going to talk about the 7 sayings of Jesus. Now, I want to explain all this, that these 7 sayings were not all taken from the book of Matthew. We have been studying the book of Matthew, but we're going to be taking them from various books. Remember, there are 4 authors. We have Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And so all of them were scribes. And what we're doing is we're taking a combination of all 4 to compose this complete story. There are some people who feel that the sayings may have occurred in a different order in Jesus' life. So the chronology may be different, and you may be wondering to whom you should follow. And you have to remember that the books of Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and John were based on memory. And I don't know about you all, but I know that my wife will say something to me. And, you know, like, honey, when you and I were going on vacation, she'd say, no, that was 2005. But I'd say, no, it was 2007, dear. No, it was 2005. Honey. Well, and then it would lead to some kind of argument. And after all, we're arguing over a date, for crying out loud. Well, and the reason is because our memories are different. How we have this committed to memory in our mind may be different. So when you look at the 4 books, don't think that one author is wrong compared to the others. Just remember they have different perspectives, different perceptions about the occurrences in Jesus' life, and they may have put them in a different chronological order in order of importance according to their perspective. So we have these 7 sayings that they're all important to mention, yet one of the 4 may have chosen to mention it and the other 3 may not have. So we have to take this collective view in order to get the full story. And that's how I've come upon collecting these 7 sayings. Let me get the verse up here, and you will see that on the slide. Get some bullets here for you to read. Go back to the verse, please. So I have the verses up here on the slide for you, and this is a summary of what happened in that verse. Remember, Jesus faced Pilate for trial. They had scourged him and stripped him of his clothes. They enclosed him in this red robe. They placed upon him a crown of thorns. And then, in mockery, they knelt before him, called him king. They beat him and eventually led him to the cross. You just saw or heard Angela sing the song, and I think that gives us a very clear depiction of his suffering. It was not insignificant in the least. It was an arduous journey for him to get to the cross, for him to eventually get put up on the cross. And his suffering was not over. I don't know if you remember, he made several comments. And none of them said, great, I'm done, I'm out of here, all my suffering is over. He never said anything like that. He was in constant pain the entire time. Of course we know being scourged is painful. We read about the slaves in the Civil War. We think about how they were whipped. And we know about the scarring and the stripes on the back of the slaves. And the treatment given to Jesus was worse, because they said that he was whipped 39 times. And they did not use the simple cat of nine tails. They used the horse's whip. And usually at the end, there would either be a pointed rock or some metal chain attached to the leather strap, so that it actually had a much more damaging impact on the body, much more physically abusive. So keep that in mind. On top of that, Jesus had to carry the cross. Think about how physically tiring that is, on top of the fact that he had not had any sleep the night before. Imagine yourselves being awake all night. Are you getting up, pause, and refresh to go to work the next day? Are you going to sit at your terminal and awake? Of course not. So Jesus was exhausted, in excruciating pain, and not only that, he had fallen. He needed somebody to help him get up. That's where we have the man named Simon who helped him carry his cross. He eventually gets to the point where they're going to mount the cross, and they're going to put him up on the cross. They gave him gall, this awful tasting wine. And you might think to yourself, why would they do that? They knew he was going to die. Why would they give him the top quality wine if they knew he was going to die? Why would they sate his palate if they knew he was going to die? That's a waste of money. This guy's going to die, for crying out loud. Why don't we give him the best wine we have? The worst wine we have. Why should we waste our good wine? Why should we waste our government taxes and money on this awful person who's going to die anyway? I want you to think about what it must have felt like at that time. Jesus was thirsty. They did not give him the good wine befitting of a king. They gave him this awful wine. When he got the first taste of it, he did not want to have any further drink. He stopped drinking. He had asked for a drink, and after the taste, he decided he didn't want any more. We now have the third hour. They crucified him, and then the soldiers. Jesus had clothing, his clothing left over. Remember, he had no estate, he had no property, he had no money, nothing to leave anybody. All he had for his estate, so to speak, were his clothes. He had traveled on his mission work for over 3 years, and all that was left of his life were his clothes. So the soldiers decided to gamble to see who would win his clothing, and they were going to divide it only among themselves. They weren't going to share with any other people in the public. So you can imagine that for these soldiers, they must have thought his clothes were valuable. I mean, look at what I'm wearing today. I've got this t-shirt and slacks. They might not be worth much. But for a soldier, they might have been worth a lot. Perhaps he had a beautiful garment. Perhaps it was a colorful garment, and the soldiers coveted his clothing. Perhaps it was a garment made by his mother, and that was something that Jesus would want to wear as a more for its emotional significance than for its monetary value. So if the soldiers were willing to gamble, which is not allowed at that time, they were willing to gamble, cast lots to get his clothes, unless they said it was worth something. If you can imagine Michael Jackson, before he died, somebody was willing to spend money to save one of his gloves because they want to save it for posterity or either for memorabilia or for nostalgia reasons. These soldiers were not basing this on memorabilia and nostalgia because they thought Jesus was somebody worth remembering. They wanted his clothing because they thought they could wear it. It was something commercial for them. It had nothing emotionally significant to them. Jesus was then hung on the cross. And when he was hung on the cross, the Bible says that about the third hour. Does that mean 3 o'clock in the morning? I mean, if we think about our day beginning, the third hour is 3 o'clock in the morning. But in the Hebrew day, the first hour was 6 a.m. Usually it was dawn. It was the beginning of the day. It doesn't mean that your day began on Saturday or Sunday as the week began, but it was when you had the break of dawn. The break of dawn was the first hour. So 3 hours of daylight would approximately be 9 a.m. they placed Jesus on the cross. And then he died at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. That's 6 hours to be hung there. 6 hours waiting to die. Keep that in mind. I want you to imagine what it must have been like 6 hours. It's not like he was hung on the cross and after a very short time he passed away. No, he had 6 hours of agony until he died. While hung on the cross, the people in the surrounding area came there to Jerusalem. They came there to celebrate Passover. You'll see in the Testament, you'll see unleavened bread, and that meant that they were celebrating the Feast of Passover. And that was a very important high holy day in Hebrew tradition. So people were coming by the hundreds to the city of Jerusalem on that day because in the evening they would celebrate Passover, which would go on through the night into the next morning, the seventh day, which was Saturday. And I think it's a very significant time when you think about it. Jesus died on the cross on their high holy day. What was the significance of that? His death coincided with Passover. And I've explained this to the deaf congregation before. Remember Moses in Egypt, going to the promised land, taking all the people with him to the promised land. And they were told to hurry and pack, and they had to be ready to go because there was the celebration. Which meant if they didn't, because they were so rushed, they had no time to pack, they had to have just a very short celebration. He knew that they would eventually have their tents, but in tradition, they are supposed to sprinkle the blood of the lamb or paint the blood of the lamb on the wall. If they didn't have the blood of the lamb, they were supposed to kill the firstborn son. Remember the plague, that there was going to be the angel of death. If they saw the blood of the lamb painted on the door, they would bypass that house. And the word that they used for the angel of death was to pass over that house. So if there was no blood of the lamb painted on